Hello and welcome to Ancient Ireland Unveiled. Picture this, you're standing on a hill looking out over the lush green fields of the Boyne Valley in the east of Ireland. The bends of the River Boyne glitter in the sun, and frankly, it looks gorgeous. Now imagine you're standing on this hill 5,000 years ago. What do you see? Below you, vast monuments are under construction. Monuments like Newgrange, Knowth, and Dowth that are aligned with the sun and filled with megalithic art, and are now today part of the UNESCO World Heritage Site of Brú na Boyne. Older than the pyramids of Egypt, these complex and magnificent structures have been witness to Ireland's evolving story, from the arrival of the first farmers and their Neolithic origins to the zenith of Atlantic European tomb building, and later becoming the backdrop to the rise of Irish Christianity and even the battlegrounds of kings. Why did people build these monuments? Why here and at this point in time? What do the latest discoveries now tell us, and what do archaeologists still want to find out? Here with me to take us on a journey into Ireland's ancient past through some of its most spectacular prehistoric monuments are Dr. Geraldine Stout and Dr. Brendan Wilkins. Geraldine is a leading authority on Irish Neolithic archaeology, part of the National Monument Service, and author of the iconic book Newgrange and the Bend of the Boyne. Her groundbreaking work has revolutionised our understanding of these ancient monuments and the societies that built them. Brendan is co-founder of Dig Ventures, a team of archaeologists who enable people like you, who believe the past is well worth understanding, to support world-class archaeological research. He's also the licensed director behind a new series of excavations in the Boyne Valley, investigating a new cluster of previously unknown Neolithic monuments that has just been discovered. And we'll talk about how you can get involved in that later. Together, we'll explore the dawn of monument building in Eastern Ireland, what we're still learning about these magnificent structures today, more than 5,000 years after they were built, and how you can help archaeologists unearth new chapters of the story. So, hello, welcome Geraldine and Brendan.
Hi,
Well,
thank you.
great to be here, Maya. Hello
Absolutely.
to everybody listening and watching.
Great to see everyone here. So our first question really gets us started, and what we'd like to know is, what is it that draws you to the Neolithic and especially the Boyne Valley, and how did your journey to becoming an archaeologist specialising in this area really begin?
Well, I had a very fortunate college career because I studied in University College Dublin at a time when Professor George Ogan was directing this great campaign in the Knowth Passage Tomb cemeteries in the Boyne Valley. And so I was to spend 3 glorious summers working on that excavation. And I learned to be a digger there, but I learned a huge amount about Irish archaeology because the site was, it's just like I called it the Disneyland of Irish archaeology because it not only had Neolithic, it had Bronze Age, Iron Age, medieval, late medieval use of the site, recycling of the monument. And when excavating there, you were really excavating Ireland's broader history. So, I mean, I was hooked for life with the Boyne Valley then. And I went on to do postdoctoral or postgraduate research into the prehistoric monuments and just the later cultural landscape of the Boyne Valley. And I was fortunate then in more recent years to excavate at Knowth and Newgrange. So, it's such an exceptional area for an Irish archaeologist.
Incredible. And how about you, Brendan? What draws you to the Neolithic, and what's your background in archaeology in Ireland?
Irish archaeology. Well, I've read plenty of Geraldine's books, so it's an honour to be here. You've literally written the book on the place, or at least two of them. So what brought me to this place? Well, I'm one of the rapidly aging generation of Celtic Tiger archaeologists. So believe it or not, over a period of about 10 to 15 years, Ireland was one of the best places in the world to be an archaeologist. Some would say it still is, but it certainly was then, because archaeology often happens in advance of the planning process. And during that period of time, from the late 90s through into the noughties, there was so much construction taking place, particularly road schemes, that it felt like it was an archaeological nirvana. There was so much happening. There was so much to do. And really, I cut my teeth over those years, and I've not looked back since. But my experience with Newgrange goes all the way back to my first year as an undergraduate, when I went to visit a friend of mine, Ross Muldoon, who's an Irish archaeologist, and I went over to see Newgrange, and I was absolutely blown away by the place. And I thought to myself, if I work really hard, do all my homework, eat all my greens, maybe one day I'll get to dig in the Boyne. And lo and behold, perhaps I didn't eat all my greens, but I managed to dig there now. So I'm absolutely 100% connected to the landscape there.
I love how for both of you, a connection to the Boyne Valley goes right back to the start of your archaeological journey. And it goes right back to the start of our archaeological journey in Ireland as well. Yeah. So on that note, let's go back 5,000 or so years to the oldest evidence that we have from the Boyne Valley. Can you tell us a little bit about what was happening here in Eastern Ireland at that point in time that we think might have led people to begin building monuments here? Geraldine, what do you think?
Yeah, what we now see is that about 5,500 years ago, we had the arrival of new settlers coming into this valley from continental Europe. We believe it's probably most likely from Brittany. And they were filled with this great spiritual vitality that had just taken hold of Western Europe. And they brought with them these new funerary traditions, the building of massive tombs to house their ancestors. And when they came, they also brought with them knowledge of farming. And that really provided, if you like, the food security as a foundation for this great building project. And now we have over 40 tombs within the Bend of the Boyne, organised in 3 cemeteries at Knowth, Newgrange and Douth.
Yeah.
There's a huge amount of activity that must have been happening at the time. I mean, we look at the landscape today and we think it's pretty peaceful, but if we go back to that time, it would have been absolutely buzzing with construction, but also with all of the activities that people would have been doing around the monuments. And today, the area is a UNESCO World Heritage Site called Brú na Boyne. It's protected. It's it's a really, really important site and famous around the world. And as you've just mentioned, many of the most famous monuments in this landscape are passage tombs, huge burial mounds like Newgrange. But that's not all, is it? There is actually a huge variety of monuments. Can we talk through some of the different types of monuments that are around this site?
Well, that's what got me very interested in writing the book on Newgrange and the Bend of the Boyne, because I was always hearing about Newgrange, but in fact, if you spend any time in the valley, you get a sense of the much longer history in the area, 5,000 years of settlement, and the tombs were a focus for much a longer period of activity. And so we have Bronze Age settlement, Iron Age settlement. We have early medieval residence, ring forts from the early medieval period. We've castles from the higher medieval period. I'm particularly interested in medieval farms worked by Cistercians in the high medieval period. So there's a whole kind of 5,000 years of history, but really they all gravitated to where these tombs were. So they really kicked it off.
And why do we have any idea of why here? Why did they choose this location? What sort of influence did the
I have to say, there's no place like County Meath. This is the most. This is the most. I'm looking out at it today. This is like the most fertile valley in Ireland. It has the best land, lush grass, for fattening cattle. But also, it has the resources of the river, of the sea, and that pasture land. And like this, with this could feed a community who went on to build these monuments. But also the coastal location is very important, because the connections that really started this movement from Europe were really these seaborne connections. So definitely these are people who knew how to sail across from Europe, who were aware of communities on either coast.
Yeah, I'd agree with all of that. What's really fascinating is that there is so much going on, and all of these monuments very much reference the natural landscape as well, the hills, the river bends, the sight lines between. And it really forces us as archaeologists to grapple with this idea that, these aren't sites or monuments that are laid out into this neutral landscape like a blank piece of paper. They're all referencing what came before, and it's all this continuous tradition all the way through, as Geraldine says, right into the early medieval period, and beyond. It's a phenomenal, rich tapestry of a landscape.
Incredible. And so there's, within the river itself, within the valley itself, we've got the river. Are there any other features that might be relevant to um,
But certainly
where the
the
takes?
actual the no, the river takes this dramatic bend, but it encloses these like three very much prominent ridges, and really the tomb builders picked out these knolls, kind of marking territory, because when you travel through the Boyne Valley, you no matter where you are, you can see these tombs because they really dominate the landscape. And so tomb builders tend to go to the highest elevation. And like me, there's kind of a lowland area, but they still picked out the highest places within this lowland area. So it's these knolls that were so important in as a location for these tombs.
Yeah.
So there's a lot around visibility and connections and being able to see across the whole
Yes,
landscape. You can't treat these monuments as individual things. They need to be seen as part of an entire landscape.
they do. They
So
do. Absolutely.
after all the time that you've spent studying them, both of you, what is it then that most interests you about these monuments? Geraldine, let's start with you.
Well, one of the things I'm particularly interested how we can see how gradually the Boyne Valley became really an area of worship on a grand scale, And when we look at the architecture of the tombs in detail, we can actually chronicle how they start from being very exclusive monuments with very small numbers of people involved in the ritual to a much grander scale where the tomb builder started to realize, look, we're going to have to provide facilities for all these worshippers, these pilgrims that come to the area. So they start to like accessorize the tombs. So we're starting to see where the entrances to the tombs become kind of flattened to create a stage for where people could gather. We're also, it's only in Ireland that we see that the art is actually on the outside of the tomb rather and on the inside. And I think that is to socially include people in the ritual activity. We've excavations have identified all these stone settings that were used for people to deposit votive offerings at the entrance to the tomb. So, and also then we get these exotic stones being placed at the front. So the whole thing is, the tomb builders are realizing that we need to deal, with people outside the tomb as well as inside the tomb. And I suppose eventually that leads to the construction of these great henge monuments in the Boyne Valley.
I love what you say there about mass worship and mass
Yeah.
celebration. Huge social engineering project. Like the
Mm,
scale that people are undertaking here is
mm.
absolutely phenomenal. And Brendan, what about you? What is it that most interests you about these monuments?
Well, yeah, as Geraldine was saying there, that high point of monumentality is these tombs with a cresting wave of an entire moment in the Middle Neolithic. It doesn't get better than that. That's a phenomenal moment, and it's a rich period to study. But I go a little further back to perhaps the early Neolithic, and even into that Mesolithic transition, so the hunter-gatherers, which preceded the first farmers, the Neolithic people, and what was happening on that moment, because it feels to me that that's a major inflection point in humanity's cultural evolution, and what a time it must have been. And there are so many complex questions, or simple questions that often result in complex answers, that have archaeologists almost coming to blows over the answer to it. You know, were these monuments brought in by this immigrant population? Was it something that was generated through the native Mesolithic population? What happened towards the two? Was it the building project of a rich, powerful and dominant elite, or perhaps was it more of a cooperative endeavor? So all of these questions that are very, very difficult to get answers to, because we're going so far back that the evidence is very partial. It's very difficult to see in the ground, and it really tests the limit of archaeological skills and archaeological thinking. But these are questions that are relevant to now, even more relevant every day that goes by, because we're also going through a period of rich technological change. So I'm fascinated by the bit that comes before the tombs, and how we can use our archaeological skills to find out more.
And you know, Brendan, as you say, there had to be some kind of community buy-in into this big project, because when you think of the amount of resources that went into the construction of these tombs, I think George Ogan said 1,600 decorated stones at Nouth alone, you know, and these all had to be, these were like at least a ton in weight and had to be carried down the coast up the river. And then you all the sod that had to be removed by the fields in the fields around the monument to make up the mound. So I mean, it was a huge undertaking.
Yeah,
So yeah.
absolutely.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely huge. And Brendan, you raised some really interesting and complex questions there about what did it all mean for society? How can we figure out what it was like to be living in that time, what their societies were like? So let's try and unpick some of that a little bit. I know it's difficult, but we know that some of these monuments, they have celestial alignments. They're aligned to the sun and the stars, solstice or equinox. We know that, as you said, Geraldine, they would have required a huge deal of organisation and resources and effort to build. What do you think, as much or as little as we might know, what do we think this tells us about the Neolithic communities and their worldviews? And what does it tell us about what these monuments meant to the people who built and used them?
Well, they very much connected the monuments to the skyscape, to the solar year, to what was happening in the heavens above them. And I suppose, Newgrange is the most famous monument because, it's aligned to the sunrise and the winter solstice. But many of the other tombs in the area are aligned to solar events throughout the year. And, like for instance, there's the stone circle around the front of Newgrange. Frank Prendergast has shown that each of these individual stones throw a shadow on the entrance stone to mark equinox events. And I think, this must have something to do with, they were looking for guidance from the skies when they were going to start their farming, when they were going to start their planting, it really structured the seasons for the farming. But also, it might, just from a social point of view, it might have marked periods in the year when people gathered socially and met, and had, like almost festivals. They certainly did a lot of eating if we look at the amount of cattle bones in the pits. So, so I think that they use the skies, as their calendar to mark both farming and big gathering events throughout the year.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely, and I think this is becoming much more the topic of archaeological inquiry and real scientific research. There was a book very recently written by Clive Ruddles and Amanda Chadbourne called Stonehenge Sighting the Sun, which pulls this all together. It was just published last year because archaeologists have often kind of kept that at the fringe. It's comes from archaeoastronomy and then into earth mysteries. So not really accessed this rich field of information and knowledge, and it's coming much more into the mainstream now. So we think sometimes about, as archaeologists, on a landscape level, we often call these things taskscapes, these connections between the sites, so that it's not just dots on a map. Now, colleagues are talking about skyscapes, so that we can think of the heavens, we can think of the sky as part of almost the material culture that we have to access. So instead of staring at the ground at a tiny square centimetre of earth, we can now look upwards and consider the whole vista as part of the evidence. And it's opening a whole new understanding of these different sites, showing that there were connections across landscape, but also connections to particular solar or lunar sight lines. And I think, as Geraldine says, this is a moment when farming, okay, it can sometimes be a little bit more predictable, but what you're also doing is you're limiting the amount of food sources and domesticates that you rely on, unlike hunter-gatherers that perhaps are looking at very many. If it's not working out for them in one area, they can move to somewhere else. So that dependence on the farming calendar, that dependence on each other collectively, was very, very important. So these seasonal moments, these ceremonial moments, when different families, different kin groups could come together, became very, very, very important. And I think that's what you see with the move to archaeoastronomy and archaeology.
So that gives us, that all gives us a really an evocative image of these sort of celebratory moments, of these, moments when entire communities are coming together, and, monuments can give us that kind of insight. But do we also have much evidence about what more day-to-day life was like? Are there any
Yes.
domestic settlements that can tell us a little bit more about the less celebratory moments?
Yes, this is the bread, I suppose, the bread and butter issues, which maybe aren't as dramatic for readers, but they're very, very important. And we do know from the excavations that cattle was a big part of their economy, and we found cattle bones and sheep bones and deer bones on the excavations. But we also find evidence for wheat and barley. And we also find the tools that were used to process these. And one of the really, I suppose, exciting things that's happening at the moment is that Jessica Smith has been looking at kind of organic residues in the pots that they used on the sites, and she's finding evidence for milk and meat products in the actual fired makeup of the pots. So this is very important, because this is, like as I said earlier, this is the food security for this civilization.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as archaeologists, we're going down to the molecular level now in terms of the evidence that we can access, and it's showing us a whole different side of these stories, those familiar stories that we thought we knew how to tell, and particularly aspects such as isotopic analysis that shows the movement of people throughout Europe, or ADNA analysis that shows something similar and shows like elite groups coming together. We can now access this level of information, particularly around these sites that it might be very difficult to dig, because digging is a destructive act. We can still find so much more rich information and knowledge about them.
And of course,
So
there are houses. Sorry, Maya. We did find houses, but Professor Ogan identified houses under the tombs at Knowth, and Professor Kelly found evidence for houses, very simple houses, timber post skin and timber post houses. And I suppose it's that contrast between how simple and humble the houses were compared to the scale of the monuments. That's it's one of the most exceptional things about this area.
Incredible, isn't it, really? As you say, the microscopic to the macroscopic view, from like looking at the tiniest things to enormous things. But one of the things that we haven't yet talked about is, of course, the art. We know that Boyne is home to the largest collection of megalithic art in Western Europe. I think there's around 900 examples across Europe, of which around 400 are in the Boyne Valley. So it's a phenomenal amount of art. Can the two of you describe a little bit the kind of art that we see in and around the Boyne Valley, and what do you think it is that the carved artwork meant or symbolised? Can we even try to figure this out? What influenced this art?
Yeah.
Goodness,
Well,
how long have you
well,
got?
I suppose there's about 600, there's 600 stones that are decorated. So we know this had to be of significance to the people, because to go to so much trouble to carve so many symbols on them, on these stones, indicate, how important these were to them. But the thing is, much of the art is non-representational, it's abstract art. And so that has kind of opened up the area of art in the area to all kinds of interpretations. Like some of the symbols, like for instance, you're showing the triple spiral there. Many people have suggested that's quite unique to the Boyne Valley, and many people have suggested that it actually indicates, the three cemeteries within the Boyne Valley. Um, there's an example of a humpbacked whale in the car that's is actually something we can actually recognize in the chamber at Nouth. But in many cases, I see there on your screen, these serpentine movements. Are they reflecting the river, or are they, we can't be sure. Like I say to people that when we see a cross today, just the symbol of a cross, we know exactly what that means. We know that this is, a symbol of Christianity. It's just a symbol, but we know immediately what it is. But we can't really say the same for many of these. Like sometimes they're showing kind of what seems to be astronomical motifs. Sometimes they're showing kind of the bend in the river. But I mean, it's very much open to interpretation.
Yeah,
And Brendan, do you have any interpretations?
There's no
yeah.
Rosetta Stone.
So there is as many interpretations as there are archaeologists, and that's the beauty of this. I mean, there's different types that you'll see: circles, zigzags, cut marks, spirals, all mixed up and sometimes overlaying each other, like a piece of paper that has been rubbed out and then written over again and again and again. And in terms of like landing on one interpretation, it's like, going to the National Portrait Gallery and expecting that all the hundreds and thousands of people are all going to have the same interpretation. It's just not the case. And I like I like the idea that there's a symmetry between some of the swirling patterns and some of the eddies of the Boyne, which is a slow, shallow moving river. I like the idea that these replicate some kind of visioning or psychotropic vision that you may have if you're in an altered state. And that's not to say this is the one interpretation, but I like that because it shows that it's not just the surface of the stone that this is all about. It's about the wider practice and the wider social world that this art belongs in. And it really, I like that sense that it's a much bigger. It's this sense of the people around it rather than the object itself, which is probably different from how people think about art now as an object that can be bought and sold and so on. It is much more about the people and the community in which it sits.
And certainly, some of the symbols had, a huge amount of power. If you consider that some of them are actually hidden from view. They were actually carved into the base of stones that were then placed in sockets. So, they obviously had that. They didn't need to be seen to have that kind of power within the tomb. One thing is I suppose I'm more interested in the art from the point of view of indicating routes for the tombs and the past in passage tombs in the Boyne Valley, because there are many symbols on the art there that are quite similar to the Gulf of Morbihan tombs in Brittany, and also the Iberian Peninsula. So some of this art, there obviously there's a shared repertoire, if you like, of symbols um, within Western Europe.
Absolutely,
Amazing.
that broader
Yes,
connection is,
unity of religion, unity of beliefs
yeah.
within that
And I
area.
love the fact that you mentioned the carving of a humpback whale as well,
Yes,
which
yes.
reminds me of that connection to the sea as well, which is, again, it's something that connects all the different areas
Yeah,
as
no,
well.
I really like that, because when you start looking for these maritime connections, you can actually see it in the finds. Because quite often, as part of the grave goods, we get seashells and mussels, which are kind of, part of that. I suppose, link with that connection.
Which leads us really nicely into the next question then. And we've touched on this a little bit already, but how has our understanding of these monuments changed, and what kinds of new information are coming out of some of the ongoing research, and what are some of the latest ideas? We talked a little bit about, there's some DNA analysis, lipid analysis. Yeah, what are we continuing to learn about these sites, and how are our ideas changing?
Right. But certainly, what I'm seeing is that we're looking at that the area of worship keeps extending and extending out of out of the tomb area. It was generally believed that the tombs were the center of this ritual activity. But over the last number of years, there's been the discovery of these late Neolithic monuments. You've got these large henge monuments right on the doorstep of the tombs. But then we're finding all these ceremonial pathways on both sides, not just on the north side of the river, but on the south side of the river, which I'm sure Brenda will talk about. So you're getting a feel of a much greater Mecca within the Boyne Valley, and that there's much more regulation of worship. People are walking through this area, and they're stopping at these henge monuments before they're getting to the tombs. So I think for me, it's just, where does it stop? Because the dig ventures have found all these Neolithic monuments south of the river that seem to be connected with the tombs on the north side. So where it's just the area, the arena of worship is just getting bigger and bigger.
Yes, it's true. It's tremendous. But as well as the kind of zooming in on archaeology that we've talked about, going right down to the molecular and elemental level, we can also zoom out now with modern tools like satellite imagery or LiDAR, which creates a much broader lens to view these places. So archaeologists used to typically think of maps as a series of dots, and they could show the kind of contraction and expansion of different cultures and so on. But what that did is it was a very static view of things. We did a book club just 2 weeks ago with Jim Leary and his latest book, Footmarks, and his idea is all about movement, how people in the past were moving between places, and that sometimes our archaeological mindset kind of can fossilize this idea of the past in one particular time and make us think that people moved from one period seamlessly into another period and so on all the way to the present day. And of course, that doesn't work like that now, and it didn't work like that in the past. And these new perspectives that we can see, the view from space, if you will, helps us to see that actually what might have been the core of a very important area in the past was a periphery to an area earlier or even later. And so it really changes our understanding of these places. And that's what really excites me at the moment. Not the tiny stuff, but the big stuff.
Yes. And certainly, like I was there in 2018, when where the dry summer produced all these new henge monuments, and it's
Yeah.
like it was like the Boyne revealed itself for a few seconds, and it was just, and the sheer density
Yeah.
of these pit circles and henge monuments that were appearing all around us when we were excavating the curses at Newgrange Farm.
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
it's like these monuments are just the tip of the iceberg, really. There is so much more there.
Yes.
Which I think leads us perfectly into what you've just mentioned, which is the discovery of more monuments, not just around Boyne, but south of the river and beyond. As you say, where does it stop? How far is this area of monument building going to extend? So, Brendan, could you talk to us a little bit about some of the discoveries that Dig Ventures has been working on with University College Dublin School of Archaeology? How did we come to begin a new series of excavations looking at these a new cluster of monuments, what exactly are we looking for and what methods are we using?
Certainly. So we're looking south of the river. So the World Heritage Site has a core area defined by the three passage tombs in the bend of the Boyne. There's two areas that kind of buffer those, a northern buffer zone and a southern buffer zone. So we're looking in the southern buffer zone south of the river. And working with Dr. Steve Davis, and his collaborative partnership with the Romano-Germanic Commission, over a whole number of years, that team did large-scale geophysics, running back and forth across the landscape with a quad bike towing geophysical equipment to map what was underneath the surface. They layered on that LiDAR analysis and satellite imagery to build up a projected idea, almost a map of the area. And this was really, really important because although it had long been believed that south of the river was important, there's this paucity of remains generally because archaeologists hadn't looked there. But this area that we're looking at, which is called Denor Hill, is one of the highest points around. And as Geraldine was saying, right at the very beginning of the talk here, the Neolithic people were drawn to these high points, and this is a particularly lowland sited area. So we're looking for features that predate the passage tombs. I'm not going to go into the detail on those now, but as well as that, there's so much other stuff in the vicinity, so many other monuments. We have what we think are Neolithic houses, we have enclosures, we have burial monuments, we have field boundaries, we have post alignments. We have just about everything that you could expect. And this zooming out to look at the southern portion of the World Heritage Site, the southern buffer zone, is really starting to change our understanding, because we can now see that core in a different light. We can see its connection to an earlier landscape. An earlier landscape that potentially points even towards the Mesolithic inhabitants of the island as well, and natural sites and so on. So yeah, it's a phenomenal opportunity. I'm humbled by it, and we're working in partnership with students from UCD, local community and amateur archaeologists, as well as our community of crowdfunders as well. Very, very enjoyable.
Now, I know that talking about exactly what we found is a bit tricky at the moment because we're still in early stages of research and discovery, and we're looking at a few different monuments. But can you talk us through a couple of the different clues that we've found? I mean, there have been some pretty remarkable discoveries already before we even start to pull together the bigger picture and talk about how everything fits into the wider story of the Boyne Valley. Can we talk through maybe some of the artifacts that have come from the work that's happened so far?
Absolutely, and as you can see, some choice finds there. I mean, these would be, the find of a career, and this is just one season's work. So yeah, as Maya was saying, this isn't the moment to pull the bunny from the hat and tell you everything. And the reason for that is because archaeology is a scientific discipline. Our work has to go through a process of assessment and analysis. Every day we spend digging, we spend two analysing and writing up that work. So we're in the midst of that post-excavation work now, and our reports have to go through a process with the National Monument Service and permissions and so on. So there's phenomenal work happening, but I'm going to talk to you about some of these finds. And on the very left-hand side, you can see a chipped crystal arrowhead there. I mean, what is that? I've never found one of those. There are typically others found in Ireland, but this came from the topsoil in one of our trenches. Sometimes dates later, but we're on an early site, so an early Neolithic site here. So it's either indicative of a landscape that's inhabited for much longer, or perhaps even the artifact needs to be pushed back, its dating of it. That's a great one if you keep scrolling through. Yeah, so another early Neolithic bead. This came from above a Neolithic feature. So we're sieving every aspect of our topsoil, going very gently through everything. And this came out of the sieve. You probably were there when it happened, weren't you, Maya?
I was indeed, yeah. It was a phenomenal moment. It's so tiny, but so, as soon as you see it, you can see exactly what it is. It just stands out.
Absolutely, and this really shows, a landscape of this and a site of this importance. You have to be incredibly careful with everything. So all of the deposits that we go through, we metal detect, we sieve every aspect of it, and so there's a layer of information and artifacts that comes out of that topsoil. It doesn't tell you about the features or the structures in the site, but provides this background framing of knowledge that helps you give a colour to the site. But then some of these artifacts that you can see on the right hand side of the frame there, well, they did come out of features. So they were buried either within large post holes. We have a monument that we're looking called a post alignment, and that on the very right hand side is an early Neolithic kind of pottery called a carinated vessel. And you can see that's defined by a kind of a shoulder, a carinated shoulder, an outturned rim there. Phenomenal artifact to find. And of course that's been analysed by our pot specialist, and it's been protected and archived. But as Geraldine was saying there may be layers of information on the inside through lipid analysis that we can access that will show that the use of that vessel in the everyday lives of people in the early Neolithic. So phenomenal artifacts, phenomenal monuments that we're looking at, and really changing our understanding of that broader landscape too.
Well,
Yeah, and I think what's amazing about those artifacts is the variety of them as well. I mean, you've got this rock crystal arrowhead. That's by no means something practical. That's something that someone was making for a very specific reason, to show off, or to, for some specific ceremonial purpose. That's you're not going to be shooting that from a bow and arrow or anything like that. And then you've got beads which are decorative, and then you've got stone tools which are practical, and then you've got this incredible pottery vessel, which, among some of the earliest styles of pottery in Ireland. It's a quite amazing range that when you weave all this stuff together, you get a really, really rich view of what was happening at these sites.
Yes.
I suppose speaking as an archaeologist who spent most of their life in the Boyne Valley, I am so excited by this excavation, and I'm so impressed with the quality of work going on there and the kind of evidence that's coming up. It's a great source of joy for me to go visit that site and see what's happening.
Well, of course we have spare travels. You're always welcome, Geraldine, if we can coax you into the trench.
Speaking of which, then, obviously, Geraldine, you have an open invitation to come and visit anytime you like.
Thank you.
But how can people watching get involved, and why should they get involved, Brendan?
Well, absolutely. So if you're local to the area and you've always wanted to try archaeology, if you're a student studying archaeology at UCD or elsewhere, or if you're part of a community who wants to crowdfund and make this research happen, our doors are open. It's a hugely welcoming environment. And we're there to learn and to help each other learn. So it's very much structured as a field school. You can come along, and with zero understanding to begin with, we'll help you through our digital course of how to dig before you arrive. And then once you arrive, you'll have many professional archaeologists alongside you in the trenches to help you learn and dig. So any of those routes, but just get in touch, really.
Fantastic. And I think the link has been shared there at the bottom, and we'll share again in the chat and in the emails afterwards. But you know, this research is ongoing. It's important. The story continues to evolve. Like every time we do new research, new discoveries and new perspectives come to light. So, as Geraldine says, you know, the excitement that we have of doing these digs, of finding a new chapter of the story is endless. It's fantastic. So, how important do we think then these monuments have been through time, and how important are they to Irish communities today?
Well, as I said to you earlier, Maya, they were a focus for much later settlements. So people gravitated to them over 5,000 years. And we see that in the broad historic and prehistoric evidence in the Boyne Valley. But there's a huge national pride in this area. This area receives the highest level of protection from the National Monuments Act. It's also been a great inspiration for poets and painters and philosophers. I think of Seamus Heaney's poem on the dream of the solstice. And there's so it's a wonderful source of inspiration for the people of Ireland. And I suppose it's kind of we're very, from I suppose, a nationalistic point of view, it's a kind of a symbol of pre-colonial Ireland, so there's extra pride in it,
Yes,
you know.
So
absolutely.
much to it.
Yeah.
And do you think there's anything that the modern world can learn from this landscape? There's so much here, so much happened here as well. What do you think we can learn from this ancient landscape today?
One of the things I'd say is just the power of religion to motivate a community to produce the most amazing monuments. Like I was trying to think of it in the Irish context of, in the 19th century, even though Ireland was poor, it produced these huge cathedrals, Catholic cathedrals. And I suppose it just shows the power of religion, to lift people and to motivate them to do great things.
Yeah. Yeah, it's phenomenal. So we're in a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and there's a form of words used to describe why it's important. It's called the outstanding universal value. So the site and the collection of sites and the landscape is as important as anywhere on Earth, and it belongs to all humanity. It has that universal connection, as well as this deep local connection and significance to the people of Ireland. So that in of itself, but also to me, it's about a high point, a flowering of an ancient time when there was great change in humanity's cultural evolution, moving from one life way into an entirely different life way. And I think we're living in a world of constant change, and particularly driven around technology and its social and political and economic impacts. And so to understand and to look into one period of time where that was happening can help us understand and perhaps deal with some of the changes that are happening right now. And these could be through just empathy, understanding different peoples. It could be understanding, looking at things from a scientific method, so that we can weigh up different kinds of information. And it can be understanding culture in its broadest sense. So I think it has every bit of relevance today, and it feels like every day that goes by it becomes more relevant, not less.
And we can always learn from the past.
Yes.
So much to learn. We have quite a stream of questions coming in from people watching, which is fantastic to see. So I think time to jump into the Q&A. The first one on the list is from Christina, who has asked, did people live near the tombs? And if not, how far away did they live?
Well, there is some, as I said earlier, some evidence for housing underneath the tombs. But that's a very good question, because you wonder where there was room, really, because it seems like every inch of the place is covered with prehistoric monuments. So maybe, I know that excavations closer to the coast near Drogheda have turned up houses, and certainly kind of to the north of the bend of the Boyne have turned up some housing as well, but really on a very small scale compared, as I said, to the density of the prehistoric tombs. All we know, they had to live somewhere, but lithic, actually, flint. Looking at the flint scatters in the fields that are tilled around the Boyne Valley is probably the best indication of where the activity, where they lived.
Yeah, so those houses are earlier. They predate
Yes,
that
yes.
period, like 500 years or so,
Mm.
and then there's nothing. And so it's either we've got different kinds of houses that perhaps don't leave as much of an impact. They're in different places, but there are many hundreds and thousands of people involved in these collaborative building efforts. So they have to be somewhere. And yeah, that's perhaps an archaeological question for another day, maybe.
Well, that leads nicely into another question from Lisa, who says, Geraldine said at the start of these structures was when new settlers arrived from Brittany. But who lived in the area before that? And is there any archaeological trace of them?
There is a lot of evidence for a Mesolithic presence in the Boyne Valley. We see it mainly in the stone tools that are found in flint scatters in the fields around. But the Mesolithic communities were kind of moved through the area, hunting and gathering, and really didn't leave the monumental evidence that in that area, that the tomb builders would have left. But there's also evidence for kind of a crossover in the lithics when you look at them between the Neolithic and the Mesolithic.
Yeah.
So there was a presence there, and of course the Western Neolithic presence as well.
Yeah, that's something that really fascinates me, and the idea of persistent places that were visited by hunter-gatherer communities over and over and seasonally, and that could be one of the early reasons for the Boyne being where we are, because there's a kind of there's a high point of navigation, there's a seasonal spawning of salmon. And one of the questions that I have is that, what is the relationship between that earlier use of the landscape in the Mesolithic and then this growth of monumentality that came after? So I'm very interested in those flint scatters.
On a related note, there's a question from Mac Alice who asks, how much overlap was there in lifestyle that we can see between Mesolithic and Neolithic peoples? For example, did farmers supplement their food sources with foraging and hunting?
I think the work that Graham Warren is doing in UCD is certainly suggesting that there was a good crossover. I'm not aware. I haven't really. I'm not aware of what that where that study is extended to the Boyne Valley. As I said, we can only see that transition in the lithics found on the excavations at Nouth and Newgrange.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's these are often, as what we call in archaeology, residual finds. So they're not related to a feature or a structure or some really clear indication that this was a site of a settlement or so on in the Mesolithic. So it's hard to infer that overlap. We as archaeologists think, one period into the next period, but there's always a mix between the two. There's always a connection.
There's some really interesting other questions coming in as well, particularly around how the monuments themselves were built. So Suzanne has asked, what was used as insulation or padding between the stones when these graves were built? Was it just stone? Was there soil, moss, branches? Was bark or birch padding used? Can you tell us anything about what we're learning about how the monuments themselves were constructed?
Well, certainly from the packing point of view, they used much smaller stones to seal the spaces. You can see that when you visit Newgrange, look up in the roof chamber and you'll see that where they used much smaller stones to fill in the gaps. But also, like I know that in Newgrange, they found evidence for a whole separate mound covering the chamber before they built the much larger one. So there was a lot of sealing with earth as well. I don't know. I know that they used. If we're talking about moving material through the valley, they would have taken advantage. Certainly the river But there's now, I know that Jessica Smith has talked about the use of cattle for traction and moving stones in the Neolithic.
Yeah.
I mean, moving them must have been an absolutely phenomenal feat as well. And I think I read in one of our reports as well that it's estimated that I think around something like 14,000 trees are estimated to have been cut down to produce some of the monuments that were revealed by the UCD geophysics, which is just incredible, the scale of it again. But going back down to smaller bits of evidence, Jill has asked, would a crystal arrowhead be functional or decorative in ritual? And if I can just add to that, is there anything interesting you can add about the use of crystal, quartz and rock crystal at these monumental sites?
Do you have a take on that, Geraldine?
Well, certainly, I mean, I know that when I remember working on the excavations in Caja with the Seamus Caulfield, and a lot of the actual finds were of quartz and the crystal, So it was certainly they used it a lot in Caja, on the core tombs there. But I mean,
Yeah.
all the monuments, even quartz is such a important, like quartz is very much, it's used to decorate the entrance to the tombs. And even today, if you go to graveyards in modern cemeteries in Ireland, you'll see quite a lot of the graves are decorated with quartz. The
Yeah.
quartz has always been kind of linked more to funerary practices,
Yeah.
but I'm not sure how good they are as tools.
Yeah, I mean they'll make an edge, but we see the quartz use on other sites, particularly in funeral contexts, early medieval and so on. They are found more frequently in Ireland. This was my first on one of my sites. So it's phenomenal, but they create an edge. They could be used, but there's some skill in creating a blade or an arrowhead out of quartz, which is a higher level than using flint. So I would see it much more as a sort of decorative aspect than something more utilitarian. Particularly, we have sources of flint on the site. And it was potentially something that was passed down. It might have had its own life as well. It might have belonged to someone important and passed down as well. So as it ended up in our site, it was broken. It's probably old, and I don't think if someone just left it and just dropped it and forgot about it.
Yeah, I mean, as a material, it must have been pretty captivating. Time when people didn't have sources of light other than fire. A material that can refract light and create rainbows, or distorts light when you hold it up to the sun. I mean, it must have been quite a special, attractive material at the time. We have quite a few questions that seem to relate to each other. There's a few people asking about how the site and its cultural influence extends further than Ireland. So Aurelian has asked, I remember seeing monuments similar to Newgrange and Anglesey with similar decoration. Did the zone of Boyne Valley cultural influence extend further than Ireland? And similarly, we have a question from Jim Greenwood, who has asked, there has been research into the links between Neolithic Orkney and mainland Britain. Geraldine mentioned links to the continent. Are there indications of wider links to other parts of Britain? So can we talk a little bit maybe about how the Boyne Valley is connected to the wider world? So not just Ireland, but also Europe and Britain.
Yeah, well, certainly, the roots of the Boyne Valley come from Brittany and that kind of Iberian coastline, where we're getting the links with the art. But certainly, when you look at Orkney and Anglesey, you're getting tombs that are containing art that's very similar to the Boyne Valley. And like George Ogan has argued in a lot of his publications of those links, those strong links between the Orkneys and Anglesey, where you're getting very much Irish type passage tombs.
Yeah, and
We're allowed to
so
say that.
no, I think you're absolutely right, and we think about the Sears Barrier, and in fact it's quite the opposite. It was a prehistoric motorway, it's the thing that connected everyone. So it makes sense to see down that Atlantic facade, up into Orkney and down into Ireland, and it changes our perception again of what was the core and what was the periphery. These peripheral zones that are peripheral to Europe now are actually the core of the engine of change during certain periods of prehistory. So absolutely, those connections are really clear, both in the shape of the monuments, in the material culture, and the broader culture of people as well.
And what a fantastic note to end our discussion on. I think that's all the questions we have time for. But just as a reminder to everybody watching about how to get involved, clearly archaeological research is really exciting, fascinating, and can completely change our perceptions of the past and what that means for us today. And we still have so much to learn about these monuments. How old are they? How do they fit into the story of the Boyne Valley? And even as we've just heard, the wider world, and what do they tell us about the people who built them and their beliefs? So we're crowdfunding a 2-week excavation in July to collect new evidence, analyse it, publish it, and share the results with the world. It's completely dependent, however, on support from people like you. And without you, there will be no new discoveries and about the incredible ancient monuments on these sites. So you can help, you can join in, you can take part in person on the dig. Join us on the dig and we'll teach you everything you need to know about Neolithic archaeology, and you'll help us to collect new evidence to reveal the origins of these monuments, learning and excavating alongside our team in Ireland, who could resist a trip to Ireland to help with this project. But if you can't get to us in person, don't worry, you can support the project online as well. Support the dig and crowdfund it, and you'll get updates about our discoveries, a live stream with archaeologists from site, and news from this cutting edge research straight to your inbox as it happens. Or you can support a little bit more and get a t-shirt, or even sponsor an entire radiocarbon date. Who knows, it could be the critical piece of evidence that helps us fit the entire puzzle together about how old these sites are. So we hope to see lots of you getting involved over the summer, and we'll see you on site if you do decide to join us. Before we leave, we have one last question. What's next for Geraldine?
Oh, well, what I've been doing in the last this is the commercial break time, okay? What I've been doing in the last couple of years is looking at the impact of the Cistercians on the Boyne Valley landscape, because they gave Newgrange its name. Newgrange it was a Cistercian farm in medieval times, and we've been excavating in the Boyne Valley in a place called Beaubec, which was a French Cistercian farm. And this came out last year, Beaubec, excavation of a French Cistercian grange in the Boyne Valley. So if you would like a copy of this excavation, we would be happy to sell you one. But Newgrange, Ben the Boyne and Newgrange is still available by Cork University Press. So that's my
An absolutely essential read. Absolutely essential. All right, so one last question then to wrap us up. If I may, what would you still most like to learn about the Neolithic Boyne Valley?
Well, I'd love to dig. If either I could dig or somebody would dig a henge monument in the Boyne Valley, because henges were, I suppose, I did my masters a million years ago in prehistory on these great amphitheatres, these great prehistoric amphitheatres that are still such an impressive feature within the Boyne landscape, and except there's 13 around the periphery of the tombs, and only one has been excavated, and that was in the 1970s, before we had all the tools that we have now. So please, would somebody dig a henge monument in the Boyne Valley? That would make me very happy.
Excellent. We haven't got a head. We've got to be connected to one though. But for me, it's the first chapter. It's the why there. What was this moment, the origins of monumentality in the Boyne Valley? Just a tiny question, really, but I'd quite like to find the answer to that. And really, that's the absolute heart of our project that we're digging. So
great.
Well, thank you both so much for joining us. It's been an absolutely fantastic talk, and there are lots of comments in the chat saying how fascinating it's been, and lots of people saying that they'll see us on site in the summer too. So thank you once again for
Thank you.
joining us.
Thanks,
To
Brenda.
Brendan, to Geraldine, to everyone in the chat. We'll see you next time.
Okay. All the best, everyone. Bye bye.
Okay.
Bye.
Goodbye. Thanks for everything. Bye.